Hello and welcome back to Dear Disney presents Walt Disney, an American Original. Today we will be doing Section 4, Chapter 17. Every December over a 25-year period, Walt Disney wrote a newsy letter to his sister, Ruth Beecher, in Portland, Oregon, detailing the family events and what was going on at the studio. On December 8th, 1947, he wrote, I brought myself a birthday Christmas present, something I've wanted all my life. An electric train. Being a girl, you probably can't understand how much I wanted one when I was a kid, but I've got one now and what fun I'm having. I've set it up in one of the outer rooms adjoining my office so I can play with it in my spare moments. It's a freight train with a whistle, and real smoke comes out of the smokestack. There are switches, semaphores, stations, and everything. It's just wonderful. Trains held an almost mystical fascination for Walt Disney, dating back to his Missouri farm days when he waved to his engineer uncle. As an adult, it gave him pleasure to visit the Southern Pacific Station in Glendale, a few miles from his Los Feliz home, to feel the vibration of the tracks and then watch the passenger trains pass through on the route to San Francisco. He delighted in operating his electric train for visitors to his office. Among them were two Disney animators, Ward Kimball, who had a fully sized railroad on his property, and Ollie Johnston, who was building a 1/12 scale steam train at his home. Johnson invited Walt to watch the laying of the track and to visit the machine shop in Santa Monica where the locomotive was being built. Johnston and Kimball took Walt to see a steam railroad operating at the Beverly Hills home of Richard Jackson. By God, I want one of those for my own, said Walt. He borrowed books on railroading from Kimball, Jackson, and Johnson, and he sought others from libraries and book dealers throughout the United States. The Southern Pacific Railroad supplied blueprints, which Walt pored over with Ed Sargent, a mechanical draftsman at the studio. Walt began paying regular visits to the studio machine shop, where Roger Brogy taught him how to operate a lathe and use other tools. Ray Fox in the carpenter shop showed Walt how to work with wood. Soon, Walt had a complete wood and metal workshop at his home. One day in 1948, Walt said to Ward Kimball, How would you like to go back to the railroad fair in Chicago?" Kimball readily agreed, and the two train buffs traveled to Santa Fe Super Chief to the fair, an immense pageant saluting the development of the railroad in America, with full-size trains traveling across a mammoth stage. The most dramatic part of the program was a depiction of the Lincoln funeral train, with a Civil War locomotive slowly pulling the black-draped cars, including one from the original train. An African-American couple walked alongside in the mournful procession while the Battle Hymn of the Republic was played and sung. Walt's eyes filled with tears every time he saw the Lincoln train cross the stage. Disney and Kimball spent all of their days and evenings at the show. They climbed in and out of engine cabs, rode them across the stage during the show, talked endlessly to an old-time engineers and firemen. When Walt returned home, he told Lily, "That was the most fun I've had in my life." He began laying plans for his own train. He assigned Ed Sargent to draw plans for a 1/8 scale model of an old Central Pacific engine, number 173. Patterns were made in the studio prop shop, and Roger Brogy supervised the casting and fittings in the machine shop. Walt himself learned to do sheet metal work and laid out and fabricated the headlamp and smokestack. He made several parts in a milling machine, silver soldered and brazed smaller fittings, and began constructing the wooden boxcars and cattle cars to carry the passengers. Ollie Johnston was also building cars for his train, and one day Walt came to his office and said in a conspiratorial way, "Why don't you come out to the shop with me? I found out where they're keeping the hardwood." While Lily appreciated the peace of mind that Walt's railroad hobby had given him, she harbored some apprehensions about the miniature train project. She and Walt had been looking for property to build a new house, and Walt made the proviso that the plot had to be large enough to accommodate his miniature railroad. Lily was not certain that she wanted a train circling her new home. Walt anticipated her reluctance by having a legal agreement drawn up between Walter E. Disney, hereinafter called Walt, as first party, and Lillian B. Disney, hereinafter called Lillian, as second party, and Diane Marie Disney and Sharon Disney, both minors, hereinafter called respectively Diane and Sharon, as third parties. The agreement declared Walt as the owner of a parcel of land of which he proposed to build a residence, for the comfort, convenience, welfare, and betterment of the second and third parties, and incidentally for himself, he continued. Whereas Walt is about to become the sole proprietor and owner of a certain railroad company known as Walt Disney R.R. Co., which railroad company proposes to construct and operate a railroad in, on, upon, and over the right-of-way hereinafter described and delineated, in the operation of which railroad Walt desires to have and at all times to retain complete, full, undisturbed, unfettered, and unrestricted control and supervision, unhampered and unimpeded by the other parties hereto or by any of them, they having heretofore made known and asserted to Walt in various sundry and devious ways their collective intention to reign supreme within, and so far as concerns the aforesaid residence, and whereas the second and third parties in the future, and notwithstanding Walt's ownership of the fee title to the aforesaid parcel of land, and notwithstanding their many enthusiastic assurances verbally given to Walt and their present enthusiasm over said new residence, and their anticipated pleasures and happiness therein, may, and probably will, seek to assert rights, privileges, and authorities inconsistent with Walt's reserved and retained control and supervision over said railroad company, and the operation of said railroad company upon the right-of-way herein referred to, all to the detriment of said railroad and its efficient, profitable, and pleasurable operation, and to the injury of Walt's peace of mind, the presence and soundness of which mind, second, and third parties hereby admit. That, whereas Walt and Lillian are husband and wife, and Diane and Sharon are their children, in which family there presently exists an atmosphere of love, understanding, and trust, which all parties hereto are intensely desirous of preserving. Now, therefore, in consideration of the promises and of other good and valuable considerations, the receipt of which is hereby acknowledged by Lillian, Diane, and Sharon, the said Lillian, Diane, and Sharon hereby jointly and severally quit claim, transfer, assign, and set over to Walt all their right, title, and interest in, and to the right of way. Whew! After much looking, Walt and Lily had found property that satisfied her desire for a roomy, comfortable house, and his for enough space to run his railroad. They built the house on Carrollwood Drive in Holmby Hills, a residential area between Beverly Hills and Bel Air, and after moving in, Walt expressed his delight in a letter to the wife of Jack Cutting, who represented Disney's interests in Europe. Jack probably told you about our soda fountain, which seems to be supplying the whole neighborhood with sodas at my expense, but I'm happy to do it since it does keep our kids on the home ground, and we know where they are. The girls like the new house very much, and I think it is going to be the means of keeping them from going away from home to school, which will be all right with me. Then, too, the house with the railroad is a very enticing place for grandchildren, especially grandsons, if I'm lucky enough to have any. He called it the Carrollwood Pacific Railroad, and it was planned with customary thoroughness. Each car was individually designed with special care devoted to the caboose. It was fashioned in exact scale. The bunks, clothes, lockers, washstand, pot-bellied stove. Walt even had newspapers of the 1880 period reduced in size in place of the newspaper rack. A 300-foot test track was laid out on one of the studio stages, and studio workers were invited to take rides. The railroad passed its trials, and another track was tested outdoors. Walt designed a half-mile run along the canyon side of his Carrollwood property. He planned the site carefully, planting trees and keeping the elevation low so that his neighbors would not be disturbed. He also wanted no visual intrusions to distract his passengers. He paid to have power lines relocated so they would not be viewed from the train. Walt named his engine the Lily Bell as a conciliatory gesture to Mrs. Disney, who was unenthusiastic about the project and acquiesced only because of the obvious pleasure that the railroad gave Walt. She objected, however, when Walt wanted to make a 6-foot cut in their slope to accommodate the track. Because of Lily's opposition, he had to redesign the route with a 90-foot tunnel. He planned it with an S-curve so the passengers would be in the dark for part of the ride. The element of mystery appealed to him. His foreman suggested, "Walt, it'd be a lot cheaper if you built the tunnel straight." "Hell," Walt replied, "it'd be cheaper not to do this at all." He gave his secretary strict instructions not to tell him how much the tunnel cost. Walt delighted in donning his coveralls and engineer's cap and transporting his daughter's friends or guests at cocktail parties around the route of the Carrollwood Pacific. On weekends, he spent hours alone with the train, making engine adjustments and keeping the cars in repair. One day, he was experimenting with remote controls, sitting in the first car instead of the tender, and operating the throttle with wires. As he rounded a curve, the front wheel hit a rock, and the jolt uncoupled the engine from the tender. Walt fell backwards, pulling the wires and putting the engine in full throttle. It speeded off down the track alone. Walt jumped off the car and raced after the engine, which was spewing steam high into the air. He couldn't catch it, so he ran to the spot where the engine would emerge from the tunnel. It came out, hit a curve, and tumbled off the track, breaking off the stack and cowcatcher. It lay on its side, hissing and belching steam like a dying dragon. Walt yelled to Lily, "Come out if you want to see a terrible sight!" She hurried outside to find the broken locomotive and its crestfallen engineer. "Oh, Walt, that's too bad," she said. Walt later admitted that the train wreck had a good side. It was the first time that Lily had ever expressed any sympathy for the Carrollwood Pacific Railroad. None of Walt Disney's endeavors, not even his hobbies, was without a purpose, and the Carrollwood Pacific formed part of his growing plan for a new kind of enterprise for Walt Disney Productions. The idea had its inception, he later said, on the Sunday mornings when he took Diane and Sharon to amusement parks after Sunday school. As his daughters went on the rides, Walt studied the boredom of other parents, and he noted the squalor of the parks. Paint cracking on carousel horses, the grounds dirty and littered, the ride operators cheerless and unfriendly. Another element contributed to his thinking. He mentioned it in a remark to Ward Kimball. "You know, it's a shame people come to Hollywood and find there's nothing to see. They expect to see glamour and movie stars, and they go away disappointed. Even the people who come to this studio. What can they see? A bunch of guys bending over drawings? Wouldn't it be nice if people could come to Hollywood and see something?" Walt began talking about building an amusement park on an 11-acre triangle the studio owned across the street on Riverside Drive. He started formulating his plans for the amusement area, which he intended to call Mickey Mouse Park. He outlined his ideas in a memo on August 31st, 1948. "The main village, which includes the railroad station, is built around a village green, or informal park. In the park will be benches, a bandstand, drinking fountains, trees, and shrubs. It will be a place for people to sit and rest. Mothers and grandmothers can watch over small children at play. I want it to be very relaxing, cool, and inviting. Around the park will be built the town. At one end will be the railroad station, on the other end, the town hall. The hall will be built to represent a town hall, but actually we'll use it as our administration building. It'll be the headquarters of the entire project. Adjoining the town hall will be the fire and police stations. The fire station will contain practical fire apparatus scaled down. The police station will also be put to practical use. Here, the visitors will report all violations, lost articles, lost kids, etc. In it, we could have a little jail where the kids could look in. We might even have some characters in it." The memo listed other attractions, a drugstore with soda fountain, an opera house and movie theater, which could also be used for radio and television broadcasts, toy, doll, hobby, and bookshops, a toy repair shop and doll hospital, a candy store and factory that would sell old-fashioned candy, a magic shop and store for dollhouse furniture, a shop where Disney's artists could sell their works, a music store and a shop for children's clothing, a colorful hot dog and ice cream stand, a restaurant with rooms for birthday parties, a functioning post office. Walt planned a horse-drawn streetcar that would take guests from the main entrance to the Western Village. The village would have a general store selling cowboy items, a pony ring, a stagecoach, a donkey pack train, and perhaps a Western movie theater and a frontier museum. Surreys and buckboards would be available to take people through an old-fashioned farm and into the carnival section. "This will be attached off the village and be like the regular concession type, which will appeal to adults and kids alike. There will be roller coasters, merry-go-rounds, typical Midway stuff. This will be worked out later." Whenever Walt mentioned Mickey Mouse Park to Roy reminded his brother of the immense debt to the Bank of America and the continuing failure of the Disney post-war films to produce profits. Roy believed he had convinced Walt that undertaking an amusement park would be a financial folly. In reply to an inquiry from a business friend, Roy wrote, "Walt does a lot of talking about the amusement park idea, but truthfully, I don't know how deep his interest really is. He is more interested, I think, in ideas that would be good in an amusement park than in running one himself, and because of the tax situation, Walt doesn't have money of his own to put into these things. Thank you again for your time. It's very appreciative to me. Until next week, remember, today's special moments are tomorrow's memories.